I believe we may go ahead and get started here. Welcome to our first community cafe conversation. My name is Kelly Stafford. I am a LCSW. I work with people who have experienced trauma, and I do work with system of care here in Clark and Floyd counties, as well as I work with Centerstone. I'm here with Dominique Whipple. And Dominique, would you like to talk a little bit about what you do with IV Cares? And
yes. So, like she said, I'm Dominique Whipple. I am the director of IV Cares at Ivy Tech Community College. Most importantly, I am a mother, a community member, a sister, a friend, and someone who's here today to share just a little bit about vicarious trauma and some of the things that I've experienced. And I recently started a business called the Domino Effect. So it is a violence prevention program, and I can't wait for you all to hear more about what Kelly and I are going to discuss.
That's great. So we are here in partnership and collaboration with many organizations in Clark and Floyd counties. Following the shooting violence that happened at Harvest Homecoming, many of these organizations came together to talk about what can we do and how can we support the community. And so we determined that we definitely wanted to start some conversations on various topics involving the gun violence. So before we really get started today, we did want to take a few, to have a moment of silence for anybody who has been affected by gun violence. Thank you so much for joining me and honoring that moment and that space. I wanted to start, Dominique, by asking you to share a little bit about your experience having experienced gun violence yourself. If you would share with us some of that.
Yes. So in 2017 of January, I was back from college on winter break, and I was with a couple of friends, and there was a domestic violence situation that was occurring in the backseat of the vehicle that I was in, and I was trying to break it up. If many of you all know me, I'm such a peacekeeper, and just always trying to remedy the situation and find resources and make it better. So, of course, I was doing that in the situation, and we happened to pull over at a gas station just to diffuse the situation. And I was like, "Hey guys, don't worry about it. We'll split everybody up. I'll take someone in my car, you take someone in your car." And everyone kept arguing. And unfortunately, we could not break the situation up. So my cousin and I decided to leave. And when we were leaving, a guy that dated someone that I knew shot up the car 17 times on my side. So during that situation, we actually crashed the car too behind Waffle House. And in that moment, nobody really helped me. I had to call the ambulance for myself. I had to call 911. And I realized that I was shot in my foot and my spine. And so I had to wait until the ambulance got there and stay very still. And to this day, I still have the bullet in my spine.
That's really an amazing story, no matter how many times I've talked with you about it. I think that it is like you are here, and I'm so grateful that you are here having experienced that. So following that experience that you had, following that violence, you were at the hospital for a short period of time,
Yes.
correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that you when you went home, kind of what was your experience with going home?
So they took me to U of L Hospital because, the hospitals over here couldn't handle that level of trauma, and they were really uncertain if I was going to be paralyzed or what the extent of the injury was. So when they got me over to U of L, they honestly really didn't know what to do or how to handle it as well. And so they assessed the situation in the operating room and realized that the bullet was so close to my spine that if they touched it, I would be paralyzed. So they kind of discussed that with me, cleaned the wound up, and tried to, sew it up and get me back together as quick as possible, and took me to the room. During that time, because the nature of the situation and because the suspect was still at large, I was listed as a Jane Doe, and a lot of people couldn't find me in the hospital because, the police officers were trying to protect me, given the situation. Due to that extent and not knowing where the perpetrator was and not being able to handle the severity of the wound, they decided to send me home that afternoon after I had gotten there. So I only stayed at U of L for a few hours. They cut my clothing off of me, so there was nothing for me to go home in. They cut my shoes off of me, and so there was a nurse, a male nurse at that shift, who actually took his clothes off and went to go get something else and gave me his clothes so that I could go home. He sat with me the whole time because, again, people weren't allowed to come back. The police was guarding the door, and he really let me know that I was gonna be okay, because of course I was freaking out because they were sending me home. So he's like, "You're gonna be okay, If these things happen, you just call us and come back, or get a higher level of care at Chicago or Cincinnati, a bigger city." And so when I went home, the main thing for us is, we really didn't know how to navigate that, right? Everybody had big emotions. I had big emotions because I was the individual that experienced it. My mom was at work and really got, thrown off because she was working and she didn't know what to do. My father, he lives further away in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, and so he really couldn't get here, so he didn't know what to do. And so we were all really trying to sit in that moment and really process it with one another. So when we got home, I don't think we realized the horrible state that we really were in, because we were really just trying to survive and be thankful that it wasn't a lot worse than what it could have been.
Absolutely.
And so we kind of gaslit ourselves, honestly,
Right.
and didn't acknowledge the full extent of it because we just didn't know how to move forward, and we were just trying to find a way, not necessarily addressing the elephant in the room at first.
And I think, what we know some about trauma is that our brains sort of detach from what is happening so that we can navigate the here and the now and just kind of go through the motions. Did you feel like that was sort of where you were, sort of detached, removed?
Yes, when it first happened, I think that I was really worried about making sure that I got to the hospital safely, that my parents, were notified, that my mother got there safely. She was on call at her job and actually was trying to help another individual in the community and make sure that they were safe. And so I was really desensitized from the situation and trying to worry about everyone else. But then when I got home and I realized, like, hey, I can't walk really, I can't really bathe myself, I can't do a lot of the things that I could normally do. I think the desensitization kind of went away because I had to sit in the reality of what I was facing at that moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I know the medical experience that you had, there was a lot to go along with that medical experience. And once, that was sort of ongoing, I'm certain. How did you navigate the kind of the emotional fallout maybe that came once that desensitization wore off? Like how did you navigate that?
Right. I think that when your life gets flipped upside down, you have no other choice but to really face it. And I always say that I took for granted my able-bodiedness and the daily things that I was able to do. So once physically I was limited, my emotions started to get in tune. Like, hey, I really need to take a second to feel the severity of the situation so that I'm not unbalanced in two different places, right? Because my physical health and getting myself together physically is the top priority, but let's not neglect my emotions so that it's a running laundry list of things that I need to do. So I really took the time to say, I am a victim. This really sucks. I can't believe this happened to me. I don't know what to do. I don't know if I can get over it. I don't know. I just acknowledge all of the feelings that I was feeling in that moment. And taking the time to acknowledge that allowed me to really get in tune with myself emotionally and be able to take the next steps. So once I started to heal and, I went back to college and I was with my friends, I started hiking, I started going in nature, I started working out, I started really journaling. I went to a therapist right away because I just knew I didn't know what to do myself. Even though I was a psychology major, I was like, there's not enough training in the world for when something happens to you on that level when I've always felt safe, And so what do you do when you don't feel safe navigating the world? So I really put my trust in people around me, in community and healthcare providers and, my psychiatrist and counselor at the time to really guide me through.
You mentioned going back to school, and I want to kind of revisit that and talk a little bit more about that because tell us a little bit about going back to school. So this happened, we're on winter break,
Yes.
and then talk about that piece of going back to school.
So again, I mean, this happened at the tail end of winter break of that too. It happened in January, and honestly, because all the trauma, I can never remember the date. Like January is just a really bad time for me in general because of it. But I know it happened mid-January. I was supposed to go back in a couple of weeks, and I was like, again, I was really feeling defeated. And I was like, I don't know if I can do it. But then the reality set in for me that no one is going to come and save you. And so you have to save yourself. And I'm not privileged enough to have the resources to be able to sit out from college and not continue to build a life for myself. And so I said, do I want this to affect me in the long run or do I want to get ahead of it? And in all honesty, I did not want to get ahead of it. I was like, I don't want to go back. Never mind. I'll figure it out. I'll, do something else. But I sat down with my mom, and my mom was like, Dominique, you have to go back. So it was a quick turnaround, maybe like a week after I wasn't able to drive. So my aunt drove my car, and my mom drove her car, and my best friend came down, and they were able to get me back to school. And my best friend had to drive me around, and I wasn't able to walk all the way to class. So public safety had to drive me to on a golf cart to some of my classes, and it was very hard for me because sometimes in the middle of your goals, a wrench gets thrown in the plan, and what do you do with that wrench? Like do you let it stop you, or do you take the wrench and build yourself back up to have the tools that you need to move forward? And that's honestly what I did.
I think this is a giant wrench. I think that most people would consider this a much more than a wrench. And your mom is here with us tonight, and so I think I did want to touch on some of that, like your mom's support, your family's support, and you mentioned your best friend. Talk a little bit about that, how that was helpful for you.
Yeah, so when it initially started, I mean the support from the community and everyone was major. Like even the police force, the SWAT team, the prosecutors, the lawyers, everyone was very invested in my mental health and well-being. I mean, for the week or so that I was home, we never had to make a meal. I mean, everyone was coming by to kind of switch in shifts. We were getting large flowers, edible arrangements. People were stopping in and really trying to make sure that, everyone was okay. I think, the biggest thing that we don't think about when something is happening to us is how is it affecting our support system? So my mother always presented herself as very strong, and she is a very strong-willed woman. But that was one of the first times where we came to a level of emotional intelligence together, where we had to give each other permission to be upset about a situation that nobody was going to fix for us, that we had to heal ourselves from. And that's very hard to accept, that you may not always be in the wrong, but people may still wrong you, and then you have to heal yourself on it. And so having that candid conversation with her from a mother and daughter perspective, and allowing each other to be vulnerable and, comfort each other in that moment was very beneficial. And then the support of the community. And honestly, my best friend at the time was very devastated. She couldn't even look at me. She would change the bullet wound and change out the gauze and stuff, and she would just cry. And she was very upset. And I think because of the type of strong-willed women we were, we've never been in a situation like that where we made space for one another. So we did a thing when we were like, you can cry. I'm upset too. Like, can we just cry together? So we'll be okay. But we're not going to be okay if we sit here and act like everything is fine and we don't acknowledge that this is a really bad moment for us, but this moment doesn't define the beautiful part of life and the fact that I'm here today and I got a second chance to make everything better. No one can take that away from me.
Absolutely. Just gave me goosebumps. You were talking about your best friend and that she was helping you, and that's really hard for her. And I think also, I just want to mention and talk a little bit about how maybe your support system, not only was it like challenging for them, of course, to see you in this very terrible situation, but maybe some about how that impacted them emotionally, if if you saw that, and how you all navigated that.
Yeah, I mean, everybody was very worried about me. And it still happens to this day. Like my mom will call me 50 times if I don't answer on the first ring. And it's little things when you get traumatized that you're like, oh,
Yeah.
something is wrong with them. Like, oh my gosh, I gotta keep calling. I'm like, I'm fine. But that's that is a symptom
Yes.
of what we went through. And I know things like afterwards, I really couldn't go to the gas station and I didn't notice the effects of that. So I would let my car get all the way to E and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I gotta go to the gas station. But instead of making me go, my friends would go for me. And they realized that they were traumatized, but they're like, oh, probably not as much as how you feel at the gas station. And so just those little things of us stepping in and being present for one another, or even if I can't answer the phone, I'll say, I'm okay, are you okay? To the point where we even have the kids in our family saying, are you okay? They all say that. We always check in with one another now. And so I think the symptom is we're just more present and in tune with one another's emotions and feelings.
And I think you and I talked about your friend, your best friend, who was there for you, very supportive, and that you all had a conversation that she felt that she was so affected. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, my best friend and my mom were very tore up about the situation. And my best friend at the time, Kashana, she came to me and she was like, I feel really, really bad that I can't get over it. And my mom said the same thing. She's like, I know that you went through it personally, but I'm struggling. I'm struggling really bad with the fact that this happened to you. And when someone that you love goes through something, you can experience those same symptoms as well because it's someone that you love and care about. When you're supposed to be in a place and something bad happens at that place and you're not there, you can feel stressed and traumatized as well because you are empathetic to what was going on, and that very much so could have been you, and that was someone that you care about. And so again, just reiterating that it's okay for you to have those emotions. It's okay for you to feel that way. I'm making space for you to feel that way and I to feel that way. And how can we help each other? How can we get the help from outside? Was very pivotal for us. And I will acknowledge that at first it was very hard for me to accept that they were traumatized too.
Sure.
I was like, oh, really? Like, you can walk, like you can stand in the shower, like you're really traumatized. And that was just a little bit of my hurt talking. So that is normal too when you go through a situation and maybe someone, you feel like someone is trying to take the shine, they're not. They're just as upset as you. And so that is a little bit of the hurt that you have to acknowledge as well.
Absolutely. And that is all very normal. And I really love that you mentioned what you said about, because your best friend, you normally spent holiday breaks together,
Yeah.
but you decided not to.
Yeah.
And so she wasn't there
Right.
in a situation where she normally would have been. And so there's that double layer of,
well, if I just would have went, this wouldn't have been my fault. Or if we would have stuck to the plan, or you just would have let me come, or if we wouldn't have one another, there would have been no reason for you to go out with someone else. And in all honesty, I was sick, so I was going to help someone else while I was sick, and I should have been in the house. So I kind of beat myself up about that too. Like, oh, I was overextending myself. I didn't take care of myself first. If I would have stayed in the house, or if I would have done this or that, then I would have never been in this situation. So we both kind of played that blame game back and forth, blaming ourselves.
yeah. And I think that it's really interesting too, to talk about that, the symptoms that you experienced of avoiding the gas station, avoiding, your car would be on E, but can you talk a little bit about some of the other symptoms that you experienced?
Honestly, I will say when you get that avoidance, sometimes you don't know. I was very oblivious to the fact that that was happening until someone directly pointed the the gas situation out to me. Prior to that, I never let my car get under halfway. That's what I was taught, just in case you're in an emergency situation, or, it's very cold outside, you never let your car get past the halfway mark. And people, gently kept saying, oh, I think you need to go get some gas, or, oh, we just passed a couple gas stations, you want me to go in and, pump the gas for you? And I was like, no, I'm fine, I can just get in the morning before I go here or there. So people gently pointed that out to me, and then even stepped in and did it for me, because they could tell that I was struggling and not ready to acknowledge that. But another major one that I gained was social anxiety. I didn't understand what it was. When I was going into large crowds, I felt very small and I felt very scared. Like there was like a security breach or something when someone would put their hands in their pocket or someone would move too suddenly. I would have like really bad heart palpitations and sweaty hands. And I wasn't telling anybody that that was happening, because my anxiety is more physical and you can't tell that I'm freaking out. So I was suffering in silence for a little bit about that. I also was really scared to go around certain people that were at the school that were from Jeffersonville and knew the perpetrator. I thought that everyone was like conspiring against me, or maybe they knew him because he was still at large and, he was going to talk to them. And I felt very unsafe all of the time. And so it took a lot for me to just really sit down and play it all out until the end. So my therapist always told me, well, even if this happens, play it all out to the end. If someone is conspiring against you and blah, 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 what is the end? What happens in that scenario? If you go to the gas station and you freak out when you're pumping your gas, or you get, a trigger, what happens? And so when I started to play it all out to the end, I'm like, okay, well, I just freak out. And then no one knows I'm freaking out, because that's what's been happening, I just have heart palpitations, and then I get in the car and then I'm fine and I'm doing my technique. So once I started to play it all out to the end, and really hone in on some of those skills that I had and get in tune with myself. And another thing was I lost the ability to trust myself in that situation. Something told me to go in the gas station and get help from the clerk, and I didn't. And so I started to question my judgment a little bit. And so when you don't trust yourself and you don't trust anybody around you and you're scared of everything, like where do you go from there? And so those were some of the symptoms that I was having.
It'd be really dark, a dark place to be in when you're feeling untrusting of yourself, the world, all of that. You talked about heart palpitations, sweaty palms, and I love that you mentioned the physical symptoms of anxiety that is very common with experiencing trauma, because I think a lot of times people experience those things and they either don't recognize that it's happening at all, or certainly don't recognize that that is an anxiety or that is a trauma response.
Yeah.
Did you have any other physical sensations that you came to know as like, oh, this is my body is telling me something here?
Yes. Again, my chest would hurt like a deep heartburn, and my stomach would start to hurt. I feel like, oh, my stomach is hurting. My stomach is turning upside down. Nausea is one that, came about. I thought maybe I ate something bad or something was going on. And then another one that I just thought was completely left field was the dizziness. I didn't know that anxiety could make you dizzy a little bit. And so, like you said, if you don't know that that's a symptom, I thought I was having a medical emergency a couple times, right? I was like, oh my gosh, I'm having a heart attack. Now this is the next big thing that's happening to me.
Yeah.
Who's going to save me? Do you have an AED machine? Like I was like getting too critical about it. But I took the time to check in with my body and do a body scan and see what was going on. So, hey, I noticed my hands are sweaty. Notice that I feel like I'm tingling. Let me sit down for a second. Let me get some ice and put it on my pressure points or put it on the back of my neck. Let me call somebody. And one of the biggest suggestions that I can give anybody when they're going through that is call it. Say, hey, I feel like I'm having heart palpitations, or my hands are sweating. Like call it out. Just don't sit there and feel it. Because when you call it out, you start to acknowledge what is going on with you,
right?
And it helps you get over it quicker.
Absolutely. And I just want to mention that all of the symptoms that you mentioned, avoidance, the anxiety, the physical sensations, are all trauma responses that are not only if you have experienced that trauma yourself, but also having witnessed or heard about a trauma that has occurred. And so the reason that we're here tonight and the reason that we started this whole conversation is to talk about what happened at Harvest Homecoming, to be able to have that conversation with the community. And a big piece of that is that even if we weren't there, we didn't experience it personally, we can still have some of those symptoms. And so we have a question from our panel. So we're going to pause for just a brief moment to see if we have some questions.
Yeah, so can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for this important discussion. And Kelly, right before you took my question, you kind of touched on what I was hoping we could spend a little bit of time talking about. And that's why would I feel affected by why would I feel so significantly impacted by something that I was not a part of at all? I wasn't there. I didn't know anyone there. Can you talk a little bit about how that can still be traumatizing when you don't have a direct connection to a traumatic event?
Absolutely. And that, we have been talking a lot about that, Dominique and I, and it is something that, especially as we are all helpers, a lot of us are helpers in this room, we hear a lot about traumatizing events and things that have taken place. And especially in our community where we feel safe, typically, it is really hard to hear about violence and know that we could have been there. And our brains actually often don't know the difference when we hear about things repeatedly, when we imagine things, we think about things that are happening. Our brains think about that as if it were happening to us. And so our bodies respond with that anxiety response, that fight, flight, freeze, adrenaline response in our bodies to protect us, even if we have not experienced that ourselves.
Yeah.
And that is part of what we were talking about with your family, with your sister, with your best friend, your mother, your aunt, experiencing some of those symptoms as well.
And, and the people in the community, like the people that supported us.
Yes.
Someone who's known you since you've grown up, or someone who's seen you play sports or do all these other things, they always think, well, that could have been my daughter because my daughter was friends with Dominique, or my daughter went to school with her, or I could have been Roxana and I could have had to make sure that my kid was okay. I mean, we put all of ourselves in the situation, and that traumatizes you too if you're spinning your wheels in your head, wondering what you would do if that happened to you or if you had been there.
And I think particularly with this event that happened here in at Harvest Homecoming, hit
Can you all still hear us?
Beth, can you still hear us?
I can hear you now, sorry.
It's just the TV. Okay. So this event in particular, so many years and such a beloved community event that we really have this experience of being safe there. And then when something like this happens, it really shakes our reality and what we think and how we believe and how we see the world. So even though we may not have been there at Harvest Homecoming, we may not have even, been maybe people that were there but weren't there at that particular site, definitely experienced this trauma by hearing about it and seeing it and knowing that space where it occurred. Many of us could say we've been there in that very place where that happened. So it is very normal to feel that anxiety and that trauma from even just hearing about the events if it didn't happen to you.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about how you have recovered, what you have found to be helpful for you as you have recovered.
Yeah, I think honestly, the first step is acknowledging that something happened to you that was very tragic and upsetting. The second step is seeing what you need to feel better. And you may not know that. And so if you don't know that, then you need to seek someone who can help you kind of process and go through that. And then figuring out what you like and what makes you calm and happy. I always say that it'll be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end. I always repeat that to
My
myself.
favorites, absolutely.
Yeah. And I also say that life is a book full of beautiful chapters, beautiful beginnings and beautiful endings. And this is just a moment in time, that it doesn't define the whole story. This is just a page in the book. And so if you know that you've already been through something that is so horrible and terrifying to you, and you built yourself back up and had that resilience, then you know that if any situation happens to you, that you can do it again and again. Even if you don't want to, you know that you have the tools to take care of yourself and move forward, because it's not always going to be like that.
And your experience, and I know we've talked about it a little bit, and so that we can share with anybody who may be experiencing signs and symptoms of trauma themselves. I know that you said you did therapy and that was helpful for you. What other things did you lean on that you found helped you recover?
The perpetrator who did it to me, I spent a lot of time figuring out his story to understand why we both ended up in the positions that we were in. And once I came to terms with someone else's story and their background and maybe the things that happened to them and why they behaved the way that they did, and acknowledge that it's not about me, that they had their own circumstances, I was able to heal a little bit on my own and not leave that up to him giving me an apology or, something good happening for him. And then I also took the time to figure out what I needed to be okay. And what were things I could do. I did a lot of coloring, I did a lot of journaling, again, being in the nature, doing hikes and meditating, and I did some yoga. I tried anything to make myself feel better, honestly, because there's no limit on what you can do. And then when I found those things, I did some reading. When I found those things, I just honed in on them. But I knew I was starting to feel bad. I'm like, hey, well, let's make sure that I'm reading for 30 minutes a day. Or let me pick the books that I'm going to read this month. And then I'll pick my workout days. And then maybe I'll go and learn how to do something different and go to a yoga class. So I made sure that my schedule was full of different things to recharge my mental health.
And I know you mentioned something about journaling too earlier. And so all of these things that Dominique has mentioned as far as ways to help with recovery, there are a lot of things that you can do for yourself, that a lot of journaling, mindfulness, what we know about like yoga and meditation is that helps bring you back into your body when you've experienced trauma, personally or vicariously, secondary trauma. We get very disconnected from our bodies. And part of that is because we have those physical responses, those responses, that adrenaline, that fight, flight, freeze response. We often don't want to feel that. Yeah. So we sort of disconnect from that physical experience. And we know that a lot of somatic psychotherapies like EMDR and yoga, these types of things, belly breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, all of these things help you be mindful in the here and the now, can help bring you back into connection with your body. And sometimes that in and of itself is scary, to be back in connection with your body. Yeah. But there are a lot of different techniques that you can do on your own, but also that you might seek help for at community mental health center, or a therapist or a support group. Was there anything in particular, like from treatment, like therapy? I know, and you and I talked about it a little bit. That you just, was it the talk therapy was the best? That seemed to help you sort of process things out.
Yeah. Again, going back to the root cause of the issue and breaking it down, building a timeline and addressing the different things really helped me, because sometimes we're visual learners. We don't even know that you need to see your trauma outcome to be able to process it. And so, certain times we would have stuff in my hands and figure out how to get my hands to stop sweating. And certain times she would write it out on a whiteboard and say, okay, well, here in the timeline, how did this make you feel? Let's sit in that moment and process through it. So I know that a lot of good things are out there like EMDR, and I really recommend that people do that. But for the local resources I had at the college, we had just therapists who were doing a lot of talking.
Yeah.
We also had puppies and dog therapy that came to the clinic so much.
Great.
So
Yes.
I did I played with the puppies and they talked to me about that. And I did some art therapy too. So there was groups where we went and drew out our emotions and they helped us interpret what was on there. And then there were prompts. And sometimes I painted something a different way than someone else. And we were really in community helping figure out, what it was that we were experiencing through the art therapy.
That's great. And a lot of those things that you mentioned, even though maybe they wouldn't seem as though they were sort of somatic in the body, but the puppy therapy, the touching, that all of that is very, part of that tactile sense in your body.
Yeah.
The other piece about like writing it out or journaling is that brings that more into like the higher level thinking and processing in your brain. So the trauma, the fear, the anxiety, all of that kind of lives in our dinosaur brain and that part of our brain that is there to protect us.
Yeah.
But when we can then think about things in that higher level way with journaling or writing things out chronologically, then we can really begin to think a little more rational. Alarm emotions, if we can kind of bring those down just a little bit.
Right.
So, we're having this conversation because of what happened at Harvest Homecoming and that's sort of what prompted all of this. And you mentioned a minute ago, really feeling unsafe from like shortly after that you were unsafe with yourself, that you felt unsafe around other people. And I am guessing that a lot of people who were there at Harvest Homecoming or who, had loved ones there, just heard about it, may feel unsafe. In thinking about it or talking about it or being in that area. So I wanted to ask, what things help you feel safe now?
Well, I will say that one is still an ongoing battle. I have to get adjusted to certain situations and really just trust that, I wouldn't put myself in a negative situation and believe that there are, people out there like the police and people in positions of power that will protect me if a situation like that occurs. I think that playing it out to the end is always my big thing. Like I was even apprehensive about going to Harvest Homecoming. I was even apprehensive about taking my daughter because I thought, oh, well, maybe if something happens, how, can I protect her? And then I saw some of the younger kids down there in the ski masks, and I was supposed to go that night, but I ended up going somewhere else. And so I think that kind of reinforced the fear that I already had.
Was that re-traumatizing for you to know that you were going to be there and have that whole experience? That's another.
Yes, I definitely had some secondhand trauma from that and really felt for the victims and the family members of those individuals who maybe knew that, oh, I don't know if you should go, or had the same feelings that I felt. And so that's where that vicarious trauma kicks in. Yes, the situation that we're discussing is something that happened firsthand to me, but what just happened here recently in the community and what's been going on in surrounding communities has re-traumatized me and made me not feel safe in my community. But having the skills that I have and the knowledge that I have, I know that is a normal response when a crisis or emergency situation happens around you. But I can't let that dictate how I move around my community. That should make us all come together and help one another and figure out how we can move forward from that and put other safety measures into play.
And I'm so glad you said that, because I was going to say, even though it may not be helpful to say that is a normal reaction to that trauma, that it's very normal, and that you are not alone in feeling that, and you are not alone in experiencing that emotion.
And it takes time. It takes time to navigate something like that. And you may be scared at the next major event. And that is completely normal. However, what we, all of our community partners in the room want you to know is that we're very committed to helping make the community a safer place. And that doesn't happen overnight. It happens when we come together in community and we commit to doing our part. Hence the name the domino effect, be a part of the link of the chain of change is my slogan. And so anybody in that chain can help start the change.
Absolutely. I do want to talk a little bit more. I want to check in to see if we have any other questions, Beth.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about how to protect ourselves against vicarious trauma? So, like in light of, for example, the Harvest Homecoming incident, how would we protect ourselves psychologically from being impacted adversely by that?
I think that, we can't necessarily protect ourselves from any traumas that we might experience in the world, but we can protect ourselves as far as seeking help, talking, engaging with our communities. I suppose that in a way to protect ourselves, one of the things that I've heard recently is that what we talk about as self-care is really aftercare. And so ways that we can protect ourselves from experiencing some severe adverse reactions are to put those routines into place that give us that peace of mind, that mindfulness, whatever that looks like for you. That may be for some people prayer, that may be for some people meditation or yoga. For some people, you mentioned reading, but to really find those things that you can incorporate into your daily life, because once they become habit and routine and they get you to that mindful place, when these things happen and we experience trauma, we have those go-tos. Yeah. We have those things that we know, this is impactful for me and this helps me and this works for me. When we practice those, whatever that is, we have built those neural pathways in our brains. And so when we get there, our brains go, oh, okay, this is safe. This is calm. I know where we are. I know where we're going. And we can calm down some of those alarm emotions. Do you have other things that you feel like?
The biggest thing that I say is just acknowledging your feelings, honestly.
Absolutely.
Too many times we don't acknowledge that we're scared of certain things, or we don't even acknowledge the fact that something has happened. Again, the reason why we're here today, to shed light on the gun violence that's going on. A lot of people that I've had conversations with didn't even know that this was happening in the community, and they weren't aware of the major effects that it's been having. And so, getting in tune with not only what's going on with you, but being concerned about your neighbor as well and their well-being.
And I think a big part of that is having the conversations. I know I am teaching, Master of Social Work students right now. And one of the big things that I've talked with them about, and any healing professions, well, anybody really, but take your paid time off, take your time off, take care of yourself. Especially if you work in an environment that is high stress, a lot of crises, we need to have that time to rest and reflect and digest the things that have occurred to us or have happened to us. And I think that that's really important, especially in healing professions, that we tend to be very empathetic people.
Yeah.
And that's what happens when we hear about these things that happen in the community. As people who are very empathetic, we feel what our community members, what our community family has felt. And I know that your family, your actual family, and then also your community at school probably all felt that the effects of that trauma that happened to you too.
They did. When I got back, I found a church. And I went to the church, and I mean, this is the most beautiful story ever. They were standing up and they said, does anybody have like a praise report or something that, God did for you to bring you through the situation? So I stood up, never been to this church before. And I said, this happened to me. I'm back here at school, and I really just am glad that I'm alive because someone else isn't, and there are people out there that are hurting because of the gun violence that's going on. And everybody just started clapping and crying. And the pastor said, "You don't know this, but we prayed for you." It was a lady that worked at the cultural center at the front desk, heard about what happened to me from a lady that used to work in Indiana State who lived in New Albany. She called up there and told her, and she stood at the church and she said, "I want you all to pray for this young lady who goes here to Indiana State, who was just in this situation." And they said, "Our prayer was answered, like you were delivered to us and you are okay." And I was like, oh my gosh, but that's another example of like they were traumatized. They had been in prayer for me. They had been, waiting on my arrival, collecting things for me to make sure I was okay when I came back. And they were able to see me in the flesh and really understand. How can we address this situation and make the community feel safe and like they're seen and heard? And we see you and we hear you and we understand that this is an unfortunate circumstance, but I really would like to, do a call to action for us all to continue to come together and make sure that this is a safe community for the future generations coming forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Beth, did you have any other questions?
Just really one. I know we've been talking a lot about folks who have been impacted directly and indirectly. How do we know when it's time to access professional help?
That is a great question. And I think that a very important one is that when we start to notice that it is impacting our daily lives, or when we notice that it's impacting our loved ones' daily lives. So if we see that our kids are struggling at school, if we see that our partners, our spouses, our friends are missing work, showing up late for work, maybe having a few too many glasses of alcohol, if we notice those things that are really impacting our daily lives, that's when it is definitely time to seek help. I hope that people will begin to notice before it has sort of a negative impact on lives. But also just that, when you feel just more fatigued, maybe it's more of a struggle to get out of bed. It's always okay to ask for help. I think that especially when we have not experienced something directly for ourselves, it can feel like this didn't happen to me.
Yeah.
Like I'm not, like this is silly. Like why would I need help?
Right.
But that's why we're having this conversation, is to say that is when we want you to ask for help. We want you to maybe stop before it gets to the point where you're missing work or you're missing school. But those are definitely the things to notice. Or when you're just not enjoying the things that you normally enjoy. I know for myself, when I've experienced things in my own life, that was the flag for me, was that I was like, I don't want to go do this thing. And it was very unlike me to be like, I don't want to wait. I like to go do this thing. What is happening? Right. So do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you really hit the nail on the head with that. I mean, especially with the situation at Harvest Homecoming affecting a younger
Absolutely.
adult.
Oh, yes.
And how do we as parents have these conversations with our children, or notice that there's something off about them, and maybe realize that, I'm not the one to help them. What do we do moving forward? And there are a lot of good resources in the community that you can utilize. And so if you just acknowledge that there's something going on and that you need help and you seek that help out, I think that's a great first step for someone else to help you navigate that.
I think also, especially for young children, I'm glad that you mentioned that. For young children who don't really have the words to talk about how they feel, they don't really have the words to express that I'm anxious, and a lot of times don't even know what that means. That those physical symptoms that we talked about can be the flags, can be the things that show us what that they are experiencing something, especially with little kids. A lot of times stomach aches. You mentioned that nausea, that stomach ache. Little kids, and then they're feeling anxious, upset, scared, all of that often presents as that stomach ache. So if you have a little one who seems to be experiencing that a little bit more, that could be a sign that they need a little more help and support. I did just want to wrap up as we get toward the end of our time here and talk about what you are doing now with Ivy Cares. I know we touched on it a little bit, but I just want to talk about that a little bit more before we finish up here.
Right. I think my path into Ivy Tech was one that was definitely one that I didn't think I was going to take, but the situation led me directly into that role. But at that time, you could have never told me that I was going to be in that type of role. I thought I was going to be a psychologist in a clinical setting, you know, delivering counseling.
You're still not.
Yes. But I like to meet people where they are, and in Ivy Cares, I'm helping students find resources in the community, and we're addressing those non-academic barriers that happen because it's important for you to know that while you're achieving your goals, life is still happening, and it is very much so attainable if you put yourself in the right position and you get the resources that you need. And so that role is very on brand with, you know, everything that I've experienced while I was in college and everything that is at the core of who I am and what I've seen my parents do growing up being, you know, philanthropists and community members and, you know, really stepping in and filling in the gap. So I would like to say it's genetic, and you know, the reason why I started the domino effect, because I saw the need and the gun violence and violence going on in the community. And someone who has that experience, I think it's very important for you to step up and speak up about your experience and how you overcame it, and also be a resource.
Because you are an amazing example of resiliency, and to say that if you are experiencing trauma, if you have experienced trauma and you have been impacted by that, that there is hope and that there is recovery and an amazing recovery. And as Dominique is a fabulous example of for us. And I think that I just want to thank you so much for sharing everything that you did today. Thank you all for coming and attending. And please reach out if you do need help. There are many, many resources within the community, and it is okay not to be okay.
Yes.
We definitely encourage you to seek help.
Thank you.
Beth, did you have any words to wrap up for us?
No, thank you both so much.
Thank you so much.
Everyone enjoy the rest of your night.